Good evening. My name is Jorge Valdivia, and I'm the Performing Arts Director for the National Museum of Mexican Art. Thank you for joining us for tonight's interview. This evening, I'm interviewing Betto Arcos, who is a native of Jalapa, Veracruz, Mexico. He is also a radio journalist and music curator based in Los Angeles, a regular contributor to NPR, BBC Radio 3, and KPCC, writing and producing stories about music from all over the world. Beto is a founding member of Red Periodistas Musicales de Iberoamérica, or REDPEM. In this interview, he's going to be talking about his book, his latest book, Cosmic Barrio, a collection of 150 stories about music, written for NPR and PRI's The World. Bienvenido, Beto.
Muchas gracias, Jorge. A pleasure to be with you and your community in Chicago.
So it's a pleasure to have you. I've got to tell you something. I've heard your voice a number of different times on the radio. Sometimes it's a little hard for us to make the immediate connection between the name and the voice that we hear on the radio. And so when I got your email, we were going back and forth. I just want to give people sort of the backstory that led to this. And you sent me a clip. The minute I heard your voice, I know who he is. So I want to congratulate you on this book. It's very exciting I've heard a number, I can't tell you the number of times that I've sat in my car driving and listening to your voice covering music. So congratulations on your book. Let's start with the title, Music Stories from the Cosmic Barrio. How did you come up with that title?
Well, it goes back sort of the idea for the title, maybe 20 plus years when I was music director at a local station here in Los Angeles at KPFK. I had the opportunity to create a radio program, and I asked a friend of mine to help me with a name for this program. And a couple of days later, he called and said, I have the name. And it was sort of inspired, I think, by a song composed by Los Lobos. And it's called, he says, it's called Cosmic Barrio, or the Cosmic Barrio. And I said, wow, that's a great name for it. I said, the idea behind it is that this program, or this idea of this show, it would represent all the wonderful cultures and music communities that we have in the city of Los Angeles, just like you have in Chicago, like there are in New York, like there are in all these big cities across the USA. And I thought, barrio is a word that for so many years has always been kind of, pejorative or thought of as less than. And I thought, no, I think of the barrio as a great place, as a place where people get together to celebrate music, to celebrate culture, and to have a good time. It's a positive thing for me. So that's kind of where the idea comes from. It goes back, like I said, more than 20 years. But then when I decided that I wanted to put together this book, I had to come up with a name, and I said, there is no better name than that. So that's where it comes from.
I love it. I mean, and I love the fact that you're right. I think that barrio has a negative connotation to it traditionally, right? But I think that a lot of us have intentionally reclaimed the word to add a positive spin to it. So I fully agree with you. You start your book off by briefly talking about your childhood, specifically you at the age of 6, listening to a radio program early in the morning as you're getting ready for school, and you make mention of Kiri Kiri. There's something very nostalgic about this particular part, but it's also very telling of the influence that music and radio had on you at such an early age. Who would have imagined that young boy listening to Kiri Kiri on the radio would one day grow up and do radio about music one day? So can you tell us a little bit about your childhood for people that are not familiar with your work?
Like a lot of people in Mexico, and for that matter, in other parts of Latin America, you grow up, with what your parents have,
Mhm.
whatever they can offer you. At the time, radio was the thing. Television was, not as important for us. It just, radio was the thing that kind of kept us, in the house together. And in the mornings, as I said, in the early days of my childhood, I remember listening. My mother would turn the radio to this program called La Legión Infantil de Madrugadores, and it was this kind of program for, so sort of like the uh, what was it called, the early
The
to the
Legion, early right.
yeah, the legion of early risers. What a concept. So yeah, we get up early at 6:30 in the morning. We start listening to this program. And the thing that really stuck with me, well, obviously the hosts, it was always a couple,
Hmm.
female, male and female. But the music that really grabbed me was the music of Cricri, because every song was like a little masterpiece of music and storytelling. Every
Hmm.
song was a story. And so it just, it becomes part of you. And to this day, if you ask me, Beto, can you sing, this song by Cricri? I can probably do it. So, that goes back, like I said, to the roughly to the late 60s when I was growing up. I was
Hmm.
born in 1962. So when I was about, like I said, 6, 7 years old is when I started listening to the radio. Then in the evening, my dad would listen to the contrast,
Right.
was we have in the morning the children's music. At night, we had sort of the grown-up music,
Hmm.
trios,
Hmm.
Agustin Lara, Toña la Negra, all
Hmm.
the norteño music that my dad would tune in, Los Alegres de Terán. I remember listening to them. I mean, can you believe that? Los Alegres de Terán, this is a band that was like so major, influential in their music back in the 60s and early 70s. So I remember listening to norteño music way back when. And then, of course, my sister, she would bring vinyl records. She used to work for a nanny in Mexico City. And every year she'd come visit us during the holidays. And she would bring, of course, Michael Jackson or the Jackson Five or the Carpenters or, Roberto Carlos or, and it
Yeah.
was always vinyl. She bought this, this thing, this consola, this record player, and then
Hmm.
she come home and she start playing her records. So all of that stays with you, and that's how really, music and the radio stayed with me for a long, long time.
And you do a really good job of illustrating that. And I think right off the back, and you touched on something. I didn't want to let that slip by, but you talk about how as a child it wasn't about television, it was about radio. And I think that that's one of the things that I've said. Just a little history here. So the National Museum of Mexican Art used to own a radio station. We had a license to a youth. It was a youth-driven radio station called Radio Arte. This is years ago, but we also had a radio program that was completely dedicated to música infantil en español. It was called Sueño Infantil, and we played a lot of cri. The point that I'm trying to make here that you touched on, and I want to sort of elaborate a little bit more on, is how radio, I think historically, was always held in a very high regard in Latin America. And would you agree with that statement?
Absolutely. I mean, and I would go one step further. In the last 20 years, because of my work, because of the idea of storytelling through radio, I've come to believe that radio, for many people, for millions of people, all over Latin America, it became a form of literature. Since
Mm.
people couldn't, buy books, since they didn't have access to, in some cases, to education, they would listen to the radio, and radio became a form of literature because it really educated people. I mean, I remember there was a story by this wonderful writer, that I heard. when I was living in Colorado, going to college there. Luis Rafael Sanchez. He said this back in the 30s and 40s. There was a songbook called Cancionero Picot. He says there was a period. He says when all of Latin America became unified through songs.
Hmm.
So people in Mexico were singing tangos, and people in Peru were singing rancheras, and people in Venezuela were singing, boleros, and it was Cancionero Picot, which actually I don't know if you remember this brand. Picot was like Alka Seltzer,
Aqua Salter.
Sal de Uvas Picot,
Dale
right?
uva.
Yeah. So they produced this songbook that had the latest hits of songs all over Latin America, and they
Mhm.
put it out. So if you collected, I don't know if 10 or 20 of those little bags of Saldivas Picot, you go
Mhm.
to the store and you redeem it to get the songbook. And so then they would have a program called La Hora del Cancionero Picot, and people would tune into that radio every night and listen to the songs and sing along. So what I'm saying here is that yes, absolutely, radio was so important back in the day to so many millions of people across the continent. And in some way, it became a way in which I mean, it's no surprise nowadays when you travel through, and I've traveled, in the book actually,
Mhm.
much of what this book is about my travels around Latin America. I've encountered people in Brazil, in Argentina, in Peru, in Colombia that come up to me and say, oh yeah, your music, rancheras from Mexico, I grew up listening to them. Everybody knows
Yeah,
Mexican music.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Most definitely. Now you do. Yeah, I want to go back to your. I followed the clips that you shared with me, the excerpts from the book that you shared with me. I love how it's not just about the stories that you did, but it's also about the influence that music has had on your life and your travels, as you said already. And there's a particular moment in your life when you leave Mexico and you come to live in Palo Alto, California. If I'm not mistaken, this is at the age of 15. How did that change you?
Oh God. I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say I just don't think I'd be here talking to you if it weren't for that first, year in the U.S. I was 15 years old. I was, a teenager coming from a barrio, like a serious, down home barrio in Jalapa. I was, an altar boy at a parish, Jesuit, run by Jesuit from California, and one of them had family visiting him during the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe. So I became the host of the family. It was actually the priest's brother and his son. They were visiting, and so I took him around, and they wanted me to be kind of their tour guide. I mean,
Yeah.
remember, I'm 13 years old when this happens. I don't speak a word of English. I mean, maybe good morning, that kind of stuff. But then they really, they just wanted to do something, to help me out. I mean, they visited my family. They realized that I was, from a poor working class family.
Yeah.
My father was a carpenter, and I lived with them for one full year. I went to school in yes, in Palo Alto, as you I'm sure you know what's in Palo Alto today. One of the major hubs of the Silicon Valley.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I lived there on Sycamore Street in Palo Alto with an American family that hosted me for a full year, bought me clothes, fed me, signed me up to go to school. I learned English. I started writing in English. And of course, American culture became part of me. I mean, I,
Yeah.
I was listening to back then. Those days were, when the Eagles Hotel California, had just become the biggest, album of the year. I started listening to all kinds of American pop music. So yes, when I went back to Mexico, Beto had changed completely. I mean, I was just not the
Beto
same.
had his own vinyl collection.
Absolutely. I mean, I started accumulating my own, my own taste for music. So now I had these two things, these two cultures that I could go to. I was
Mhm.
listening to music in English, I was listening to music in Spanish from all over Latin America, and as soon as I got into college, a whole new world opened up with Nueva Trova Cubana, Silvio Rodriguez, all the bands from South America that were playing folk music, and I mean that's it. To me, the dramatic change in my life happened when I was 15 years old. I just don't think I'd be, like I said, doing what I'm doing if it weren't for that year spent in Palo Alto.
And there's a moment where when all this is happening, when you somehow, we see a bunch of guitars and instruments behind you, but there's the you make mention of when you learn how to play the guitar, and tell us about that. I think you joined your brother's choir.
Yeah, when I returned from Palo Alto in 1978, I lived there 1978 to 1977 to 78. My I had two brothers and a sister. They were both part of the choir, the same choir, the same church where I had been an altar boy before. Now they were playing guitars, and my brother was the choir director. And so, of course, as soon as I returned, they said, "Hey, man, this is what we're doing. Why don't you, join us?" And I said, "Well, but what am I going to do? Sing?" No, no, we'll teach you how to play the guitar. So within a few months, I was, singing not just in Spanish. I was singing, songs in English, and going out to serenade, and I mean, it was another completely different thing. Just kind of happened when I joined the choir, and I started singing. I started to, oh, okay, I'm out of tune. Okay, I got to be in tune. So you learn to appreciate music. I mean, it's fair to say from a musician's perspective. So
Mhm.
so I develop an ear for music, for a certain type of music, for a
Mhm.
certain type of sound, and you realize, okay, I know when someone is not singing in tune.
Now, I want to talk about the artists that you've interviewed, and but before we do, how about we listen to one of your clips? And if I'm not mistaken, you have a clip with an interview that you did with Lila Downs. So we're going to listen to it now.
Last September, during the US presidential campaign, Lila Downs wrote a song called The Demagogue. It was her critique of the Republican candidate.
Sometimes being explicit isn't very useful. That's what I felt. When we wrote The Demagogue, that's exactly what I felt.
After the song was released as a single and nothing came of it, Downs was both depressed and angry. Downs then wrote a song called Envidia, Envy.
After getting angry because people hate us because we're racially inferior to them, well, you know what I think of you? I think you're envious of me. That's what you are. You may be white, but you know what? You don't know how to dance. And I'm being very confrontational about that in this song. And I really do think it's about envy.
So tell us a little bit about this particular clip that we just listened to.
Well, it's. I'll try to make it short because Lila Downs. I have a lot of stories about Lila.
Uh-huh.
One I think that's very important to tell is that I saw her for the first time in Oaxaca before she even had an album. I think she had a cassette at the time. Uh, this is back in 19. I moved to LA in '95, so I went there to Oaxaca with my wife in '96, and we walked to this artist took us to this club, and we saw Lila performing just a saxophone with with her husband Paul,
Yeah.
and piano and a guitarist, and that was the first time I saw her, 1996. Again, she didn't have a CD yet; she had recorded a cassette. In fact, she didn't even have a cassette at the time; she had sold out or something. So, fast forward the following about maybe 4 months later, she came to LA. She looked us up. She called us, and we got together. And she brought us a cassette of hers that she had recorded. And that was the first sort of exchange that we had. Then over the years, she contacted me and wanted to perform in LA. I helped her, I helped her get a gig here in LA at a small club. And then she played at the Hollywood Bowl, at a big festival for for the Dalai Lama, which I was one of the sort of curators, community, participants in that. And I actually emceed at the Hollywood Bowl and even introduced Lila myself. So, we kept in touch, and then pretty soon I started working for her. I was her co-manager for about 7 years. So that's sort of the backstory, a personal story with Lila.
Mhm.
Now, I stopped working for her, and this was, roughly 10 years ago. And then, of course, I've been in touch with her and her husband for a while every year. And every time they come out with a new record, they send me sort of the advance. This record that I sort of profile, or I address in this particular story, has to do with, it's in a chapter that I call in the book Immigration. And it has to do a lot of that album. It's called Salón, Lágrimas y Deseo, I think it's called, the album. Lila addresses immigration probably more than any other album. I think the last time she did that, much more, sort of confronting the situation of immigrants, was on the album that was, the title says it all, Border, La Línea.
Yeah.
That was her third record. But in this one, she revisits, but in a sense, with what's happening in this country. This is
Right.
This is an
I would
album
say even bolder. Would you not agree?
yeah, I would actually say, yeah, that it was a much stronger statement, because she was also using a form of these romantic ballads, boleros, that she, in a sense, reimagined as these songs of, tragic, encounters. And it was sort of the concept that I really liked. And so it's the story of how that, that album addresses the issues of immigrants, the issues of people coming across the border, the relationship that we have as people with politicians, the love and hate, if you will, relationship. And ultimately it's about the plight of immigrants and their journeys and their tragic, situations in some cases. So I wanted to tell the story of that particular album. Yeah.
There's always a story behind the music.
Yeah.
And I think you do a very good job of bringing that to the forefront. It's interesting, we actually presented Lila Downs in, let's see, what year was it? I want to say it was 2007 or no, yeah, I think 2007 in Houston, Texas. As part of the sort of Juana Festival. As a matter of fact, a lot of the artists that you feature, we've presented. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. I've seen him live, and I really, really was looking forward to this interview because I wanted to talk to you about your interview with Celso Piña. And what was it like for you to meet him and interview him?
Celso Piña likes to reminisce about the days when he was learning to play the accordion in his barrio in Monterrey, Mexico.
La primera que grabé fue esta.
To learn this seemingly simple cumbia,
Y eres lo que batallé para imponer este género musical aquí en mi tierra.
Piña says he told the label manager he struggled for many years to establish Colombian music in Mexico and would not change it simply to satisfy a market. Wow, Celso Piña is, God, talk about the real deal. Talk about someone from the barrio. I mean, this guy is, was really one of the most down-to-earth persons. The thing that I really, really loved about him is the way he spoke. So many times, like I said before, this book has about 150 stories. You interview people and, they give you their opinion and all of that. But but to get a chance to be with someone in their space in person and to talk to them and to sit down and to have him play the accordion like he did, and the way he spoke, the way he expressed himself was just, oh my God. I mean, it was just one of the most fun experiences to, where he would not hold anything back. I mean, he was
Yeah.
serious. When I asked him about how he was able to, you know to pursue his career, because for the longest time, he says, the record label uh, told him that he shouldn't be doing that music, that it just wasn't going to sell, and he was kind of rejected, and he basically, he didn't want to do what the label told him to do. He wanted to do his thing. He had a love affair, a deep respect and appreciation for Colombian music.
Mhm.
Colombian music played on accordion,
Yeah.
specifically the style of accordion that's played in vallenato and in the different styles of music of the Caribbean coast of Colombia. And he wanted to play that music, and the label didn't want him to play that music because for them it just wasn't going to sell.
What can
It
they?
just,
What? I'm sorry, but it's really hard for any of us, I would say, to imagine Celso playing anything other than the music he's known for,
yeah,
cumbia, right?
yeah.
And I'm just, do you know what they wanted him to play? What
Well,
type of?
they wanted him to play, pop music. They wanted him to play this sound that was sort of generic,
Yeah,
that would be played on, pop radio, that would obviously bring him a bigger audience. And he felt, no, I can't do that because I'm not feeling it. And so then he was approached by a producer from Monterrey, and they said, you know what? Why don't we do this? Why don't we invite guest singers
hmm,
in your album, and you play the music that you play, and let's invite, Natalia Lafourcade, Julieta Venegas. Let's invite all of these people. They love you, they appreciate what you do,
yeah.
and they would be thrilled to do this. And so pretty soon he started recording with all of these, guest singers, and the album went, big.
Voted. Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's how it worked out. It turns, he says, look, I'm not a singer. I love to play, but so when this friend producer approached me about it, with this idea, and I said, wow, yeah, I love that. Let's do it. And
Yeah.
so pretty soon he started recording a lot of his albums. If you remember, a lot of his albums are about that. They're
Yeah.
duets. They have various singers from different parts of the world, mostly Latin American, but
Mhm.
others, from different parts as well,
Right.
joining him in the album. And that's how he ended up becoming, the Celso Piña that we know, as far as, popularity and respect and all of that.
Celso
Um,
Piña, he came to Chicago quite often. He was very beloved. And, I would say that um, the last 4 years, he he came to Chicago once or twice, sometimes twice, and he was just, Chicago loved him. So it was just, it's such a devastating loss to the arts community, because his music was just, it crossed borders and it brought people together. So yeah, he definitely left a huge void. But I'm glad that you got to interview him, and I'm actually even happier knowing that he was a very down to earth person, because that's what he projected whenever he was on stage. You
Absolutely.
know,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so I want to talk a little bit about another artist that we have also featured at the National Museum of Mexican Art. And I've actually seen her perform. I've seen her evolve as an artist. I know that right now she's currently living in Paris, if I'm not mistaken, or in France. I'm referring to Carla Morisson. And
Yes.
I just, if you could tell us a little bit about this interview that you did with Carla Morisson, what was it like? What's Carla like?
Carla was also, very down to earth. This was an interview where she was at the time in Mexico City, I was here in Los Angeles. We spoke via Skype, and she recorded herself and then sent me the file. Carla was, I thought, was really interesting because I didn't know much about her actual story, how she ended up having that last name. And it
Oh
had to
yeah,
do with her father. That you probably
yeah.
know the story that her
Tell it. It's a good
her
story.
her father was an immigrant working in the San Diego area, and this person that hired him wanted him to stay and and live there, but he couldn't for some reason or another. So probably having to do with papers. So he adopted him, and he took the name Morrison from this guy in the San Diego area, and that's how Carla ended up with that last name, as opposed to, I don't even know what last name she had before, but she grew up in this border town called Tecate, which of course people think of it as the as the sort of beer town or something,
Yeah.
but it's much more than that. In fact, it's also famous with the border community for its bakeries. They have some amazing, pan dulce, bakeries that they have there in the city, and people travel for miles and miles to get some of that
To
bread.
Tecate for the
Yeah,
fight.
to get the
Fun.
bakeries. Yeah, pan dulce in from Tecate. But so it was really special to talk to her about her music, and it's an area, it's a type of music that I had not sort of been into until I listened to her music,
Yeah.
and I saw her in concert in Guadalajara at the Teatro Diana, and I remember the type of fan of following that she has is something very different that I had not seen ever in my life. I
Hmm.
mean, if I had been, maybe when the Beatles were appearing, were doing concerts, early on, maybe it might have been something like that. But the fans were just, when she came out on stage, I mean, they screamed like, oh my God, it was unreal, unreal.
Yeah.
And then they were singing every song, every note, I
Yeah.
mean, whenever she did something, wow, you would hear them. It was an unusual type of interaction that I had not seen with an artist before. That was really special. I thought,
It's always like
wow, wow.
they were mesmerized.
Yeah,
Yeah.
completely. It was as if she was in a bubble and she embraced them all
Oh
into
wow.
that bubble,
Yeah.
and everyone was in their element. It was like everyone was
Mhm.
being embraced by sort of almost like a mother, like a
So
motherly figure.
it's very interesting that you mentioned this because I used the word evolve earlier to describe Carla, my experience with her as an artist. I saw her one of her very first shows in Chicago early on in her career, admittedly, and I will say that you could tell that she was bashful, that she almost hid behind. Um, there was something. There was this fear that she still had because she was relatively new to the scene, and I remember when we booked her for years later, we booked her for a performance at the National Museum of Mexican Art, and I remember speaking with the booking agent Maria Matias, colleague of mine, friend of mine that I've worked with many times. And so we're talking, and Maria made a point to tell me, she's like, Jorge, by the way, Carla is no longer shy on stage. She moves around. She's lost that stage fright that she used to have before. And I think that's one thing. I bring that up because I think it's something that people don't realize about the person that they see on stage. At some point, for some people that are on stage, some artists, they're human and they will suffer from stage fright. It is inevitable for some people. So I'm very glad to know that that she no longer has that stage fright. She's come a long way. She's, I think, an excellent artist. But I wanted to sort of I wanted to hear about your experience with her because we've presented her, and I just love the fact that as I go through the names of the artists that you've interviewed, Magos Herrera is another artist. I love Magos. I got to hang out with her in Mexico City when I was out there, and we brought her to Millennium Park for I believe it was our 20th anniversary concert. It was her. It was a mix of music. So it was her, and then we ended the evening. We had mariachi, Magos Herrera, and then we had Oso Matli perform as well. But at this point, if it's okay with you, I want to sort of, go with another clip. And here's another Chicago connection. I don't know. Do you want to talk about them before or after the clip?
Let's
I'm
listen.
Mariachi Herencia de Mexico. So
let's listen to the clip, and I'll tell you. Yeah.
Great. Let's listen to this clip. This is Mariachi Herencia.
It's a Friday evening at La Fonda de los Camperos. Set near MacArthur Park, it's LA's most revered venue for mariachi music and home to the Grammy-winning ensemble, Los Camperos. But the stars of tonight's show are from Chicago. 16 teenagers, 8 boys and 8 girls. They're called Mariachi Herencia de Mexico. Melanie Juarez is 13. She plays guitar and is one of the lead singers. She's thrilled to be playing tonight at La Fonda.
It's just really a big honor to be here, knowing that those mariachi camperos actually performs here and they're here, and me having to be here it's something amazing.
Marco Villela is 14. He plays the trumpet and sings.
I am quite very honored to be here because I'm a very huge admirer of the Camperos, and it's just unexplainable how amazing this is.
Great. So tell us about this interview that you did with Mariachi Herencia, please, and the story. First of all, for people who live in Chicago, if you don't know who they are, shame on you. but that's what we have. Betto, he's going to tell us about this mariachi.
They came to Los Angeles. I met them and I saw them perform at probably the most well-known mariachi venue in town, which is called La Fonda. This sort of the first, and I don't think I'm wrong when I say this, the first restaurant that had mariachi in the 60s, and it was created by none other than the great Nati Cano. With his group at the time called Los Camperos de Nati Cano. Famous because, of course, they recorded with Linda Ronstadt and many others.
Yeah.
So I met them there at La Fonda before they started playing. They were very excited, and some of the kids, because they're all teenagers, they were kind of, shall we say, just really you could sense they were tense. They were just like, oh my God, I wonder who's going to show up, who's going to see us, because of this. They knew that this was a sort of temple of mariachi music in North America, to say the least. Yeah. And they were, just wondering what if, some of the great mariachi players show up when we're playing, and they, and they don't like what we're doing or something, So I had the feeling that there was this kind of concern and excitement at the same time. But that said, they played an amazing set of music. It was just fantastic. It was incredible to see all of these kids playing in front of of an audience while people are having their dinners. It was really, really special, and I got to interview a couple of them. Marco Villalba is the one kid that stands out for me because he's also one of the lead singers of the group. I think he plays trumpet. And he was just really, really excited to play in Los Angeles. The story that I told on the radio, and of course it's in the book, is the story of how, Cesar Maldonado, who was like a banker, an investment banker, decided to start this program of mariachi. Started first in Chicago schools, and then created this group and started signing up kids from different neighborhoods, different barrios, most of them working class, most of them children of immigrants.
Yeah.
And I wanted to tell the story of how this group from Chicago was playing in Los Angeles and had connections to mariachi groups here in Los Angeles. Jose Hernandez apparently produced, directed the first album of theirs. They've been, nominated for
Latin Grammy.
Latin Grammys. And I just love the story of how, this connection to LA and Chicago. I mean, I've known for many, many years that Chicago has a great musical tradition, and that, there's been mariachis there as well for a long, long time. But to find the connection between Los Angeles, the mariachi culture here, and I interviewed Jose Hernandez, I interviewed Checo Alonso, who plays harp, and they were, telling me about working with the group. And so to me, when I see kids playing music of their parents, playing the music of their culture, it's really exciting for me to I want to tell their story, and I want to tell the story with all the nuances, all the different textures and colors that it deserves.
And I would also say, I would also add that I think that Mariachi Herencia does a very good job of making the music, taking the music that as you mentioned, perhaps the music of their parents, but they also, I think, have managed to make it their own because of some of the covers they've done. If you see them, they're performing in Spanish, but they're also performing in English, and they're actually having a lot of fun with it. With some of the sets that they've done here at Millennium Park. So kudos to them. I'm hoping that we can, if you don't mind, and you'll humor me a little bit, let's continue to talk about mariachis. I want to talk about female mariachis because you talk about this in your book as well. Female mariachis in Los Angeles. And I want to bring this up because we actually finally have an all-female mariachi here in Chicago, Mariachi Sirenas. But let's talk about the female mariachi section of your book. In your book, you focus on female mariachis in Los Angeles, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah, there is I've always known that we've had, a culture of women mariachis here in Los Angeles, but I didn't know to what extent, to how big was that culture of women playing this music. Now let's keep in mind, this has been a male dominated style for decades. I mean, right. It's macho driven. The music itself, people think of it as this kind of, overtly, virile, macho sounding music. But in Los Angeles, actually, let's give him some credit. Jose Hernandez created the first all-female mariachi group, Mariachi Reina de Los Angeles. And I found out, doing some research, talking to different people, different players across the city from different mariachi groups. And they confirmed to me that Jose Hernandez wanted to have, to create this culture, to have all women. Why not? And, remember, this is something that is not even happening in Mexico. I mean, there's probably one or two mariachi groups. I don't know how many there are, maybe in Guadalajara, maybe in Mexico City. But in LA alone, somebody told me, Betto, maybe there's 12, maybe there's 13 mariachi groups. Here is the largest concentration of mariachi women here.
I think, since we're on the subject, I actually want to expand a little bit on it because I think that female mariachis are often overlooked. When I started my work as performing arts director years ago, this is back in 2006, I can tell you this, I did some research on just informal research, trying to search through the internet, trying to find female mariachis. There was a database that I found online, and the history is actually, it goes way back in the Southwest. In Arizona, I think was one of the states where I found like the earliest mariachis. So, I mean, I hear what you're saying about the Mariachi Reina de Los Angeles, is it? But, the point that I'm really trying to make is that we often focus so much on the male mariachis, but we forget, there's so many female mariachis in Texas, for instance, in San Antonio, and Houston has a female mariachi as well. I think San Antonio has more. Dallas has quite a few, and so, but there's also other female mariachis in Arizona as well that are often sort of not mentioned. And I say all this because I think it's our own fault, because the industry has focused so much on putting, on it is a male-dominated industry, mariachi music.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, what I like to tell the story is not who was first or who was last,
no,
and all of that. To me, what's important here is that women finally are being accepted. There are now musicians here in LA that respect these groups, that finally said, okay, yeah, they can play. They can play. They have the right to play, and occasionally they'll find someone that's gonna, say, no, they don't play the same. But who cares? The fact is, they decided to create these groups, and some of them have won all kinds of awards. You probably know Mariachi Divas. They've gotten, I don't know, 1 or 2 Grammys, and
we presented them.
Nominated I don't know how many times.
Yeah.
Mariachi Reina, there is Mariachi Lindas Mexicanas. And so on. And then, of course, there's the other story of a group that has nothing to do with mariachi culture, and yet, they have been also playing mariachi music. Flor de Toloache, out of New York, and their thing for me was really special, is how they're creating this sound, blending the sound of the mariachi instruments with R&B. To me, that was the story that I wanted to tell. Is that they're creating a completely different sound that had the underlying current of the mariachi sound, but they're also singing, songs in English, and they're singing them with this kind of R&B, quality. I just love that.
I want to commend you on including this section in your book and highlighting female mariachis, because I think you're absolutely right. It's about time that we recognize them and we give them credit, because they've been around for quite a long time, and they just haven't necessarily always been in the spotlight. That is truly the point that I meant to make earlier, and I'm glad that you highlighted them. So from that, if it's okay with you, I'd like to talk about. There's a particular section in your book where you talk about the night Rage Against the Machine reunited for a benefit show. And I love this because there's so much excitement in the way that you describe this moment. And you talk about how it's a benefit for organizations that are fighting SB 1070. And so tell us a little bit about this. I don't know if you want to talk about SB 1070 as sort of a backdrop, the history, and then the evening.
For the 3,600 people who got tickets, it was a night to remember. The band Rage Against the Machine reuniting for a benefit concert 10 years after the last show in Los Angeles. This concert sold out in 30 seconds. The reason for the reunion? Arizona's anti-immigration law, SB 1070. Lidia Romero says that's why it was such a special night.
We're standing in solidarity with our compañeros and our compañeras in Arizona against SB 1070.
Would you be here if they weren't for that?
Would I be here to see Rage Against the Machine? I would be here to see them, but it wouldn't have the same feeling.
We have some brothers and sisters from Arizona that are here this evening. Brothers and sisters who we love very much.
That's Rage Against the Machine's Zach de la Rocha. Well, there was this, anti-immigrant law that was, being considered in Arizona some years ago, SB 1070. And there were different groups organizing across the Southwest against it. And as, some people know, Zach de la Rocha is Mexican-American from Los Angeles, wanted to do something about it. And so he called on his friends. The band hadn't played in a long time. Okay. The band, many people thought that they had already been sort of dissolved and disbanded, and they weren't gonna get together again. And he called on them, and they got together and played at the Palladium here in Los Angeles. I'm gonna tell you something. This was a concert like none other. I mean, first of all, the Palladium holds maybe about 3,000 people. It was standing. It was, forget about seats. It was a standing place. There was not one person sitting down. The tickets went on sale, let's just say on a Wednesday at 10 in the morning. Just take a guess how long they lasted.
I know the story. I know because I read it in your book. But tell us, because for people that are listening,
Yeah, I mean, I think they sold out in less than 10 minutes. I mean, there were people, interestingly, they were supposedly only made available to folks in Southern California. In other words, if you lived in Hawaii or Chicago, you couldn't buy tickets. You had to be based here. Well, I met someone from Hawaii and I met someone from Detroit that got tickets. Well, probably, through a friend or something. I mean, when I was allowed to go in there for about 10 or 15 minutes so I can take some photos. The photo that's in the book is mine. And I kid you not, I had never been in a concert like this in my life. So I was kind of like, ooh, okay, I don't know.
Were you a little nervous?
I was nervous, but more like, geez, I hope, they're going to put us in an area where I'm going to be protected from the crowd, because, they do the mosh pit and they push and I mean, well, there were these barriers that were about maybe 2 yards away from the stage.
Mm-hmm.
And so they allowed the photographers to be in that space between the stage and the barriers. And so it was like no problem. But I was looking at people getting pushed against the barriers, and I said, oh my God, something's going to happen here.
Yeah.
The moment they came on stage, the crowd went absolutely insane.
I bet.
3,000 people screaming like there was no tomorrow. And these guys, I had never seen Rage Against the Machine in my life. This was the only time I'd seen him. Of course, I heard the records, of course.
Yeah.
But to see them live, it was unbelievable. And Zach de la Rocha, oh my God, talk about a performer.
Yeah.
He was out there, and I quoted him because of what he said at the beginning. He was saying that they had flown in activists from Arizona that were organizing against SB 1070 to the benefit.
Yeah.
And other than, I think it was Live Nation or one of those big companies that were the ones that were put on the concert at the Palladium, other than their percentage, every cent that was made at that concert went to the organizations that were fighting SB 1070.
Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned in the book that they managed to raise like over $300,000 in under 10 minutes. Well, I mean, not really under 10 minutes, but yeah.
It was just like, how lucky I was to be in that place at that moment. Luckily, I mean, I knew someone that was a friend or a sort of collaborator with Zach de la Rocha, and I contacted him and I said, hey man, can you get me in? He says, let me see. This is not an easy one. He says, you're not really official press. You're a freelancer. Mm-hmm. I said, well, I'm going to do a story for a national radio program. I said, this is going to be heard across the country. Oh, okay. Well, let me look at, at this, and let you know. Sure enough, he got me a badge and everything. And they allowed me to go in, take some photos. And it was really, I felt really privileged to be there.
Absolutely.
It was really special.
So, as we begin to wrap up our interview, I'm already at the last section, the last few questions. I'd like for you to think about all the artists that you've covered, all the stories that you've done. Is there one in particular that you think of often?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, over the years, I've been lucky enough to talk to so many different artists from different parts. I would say one story that I sort of fought for that in fact my NPR editor acknowledged to me when I met him for dinner in Washington at NPR. He said to me, that story about Danzón, you convinced me about that story. I wasn't really, sold on it, and you managed to convince me, and for that I want to thank you. And it's the story of this classical composer named Arturo Marquez,
Yeah.
who, grew up in Sonora in northern Mexico, came to Los Angeles. His family moved here. He went to high school, and eventually he got a fellowship to go to Cal Arts here in the LA area. And rather than stay with the sort of avant-garde, which is he was trained to be a composer of, kind of in the avant-garde,
Yeah.
pushing the boundaries of music. He started going with his girlfriend at the time to see people dance danzón at the various. There's a few danzón places in Mexico City.
Yeah.
And so,
which is a little different, would you not say? Which is a little different than the danzón that we typically hear in Veracruz.
Yeah, I mean well, to be fair, the story that I told in the book and on the radio is the story of how danzón came from Cuba.
Yeah.
And initially to Veracruz, and eventually it spread throughout. But the danzón that's played in Mexico specifically, in contrast or compared to the danzón in Cuba, is very different.
Yeah.
They're two different styles. Fact,
Absolutely.
they're played with completely different instruments. The danzón in Mexico is played with brass instruments.
Yeah.
In Cuba, it's played with strings and with flute, but it's not even that popular anymore. Danzón sort of died, and I tell the story of how that, over the years, Cuban music has always evolved, over the centuries. But I tell the story of how that happened, and so for me, the story was, I want to tell the story of how he was inspired by the people that were dancing, because he himself wanted to go dance too, danzón.
Yeah.
And eventually it just dawned on him that he wanted to compose music inspired by the danzón. And so he started creating danzón número uno, and then he composed danzón número dos, and the rest, I should say, is just history. It became, probably there's Mexico has a national anthem. Everybody knows it. If you're from Mexico, you know the national anthem. The second anthem that's always been associated with Mexico is a piece called Huapango, composed by Jose Pablo Moncayo, who's not from Veracruz, even though it's mostly a piece based on sones jarochos, a piece called Huapango. That became the second sort of national anthem. Well, I would argue that now it's between Danzón Número Dos and Huapango that are sort of the second unofficial anthems of Mexico. And so this is what happened. He kept composing, and the last one he composed was for the Los Angeles Philharmonic, Danzón Número Nueve, and I got a chance to see it performed here by the LA Phil a couple of years ago.
So I love danzón, and I think I am almost certain that I actually heard this story that you did on danzón, and there's something. You did an amazing job in telling the story, and I gotta say, to me, danzón, there's something nostalgic, romantic about it, right? And I think if for anyone who has had the privilege of seeing ballet folklorico, I think they do, forget about that. I mean, yeah, most definitely that. But also, like, if you see danzón, people dancing danzón in Mexico, there's just something so beautiful about it. And I think that, it's not only older couples, you're starting to see a younger generation as well, and it's funny because we have an annual danzón event at the museum that we've been doing for a few years already. But I'm going to share with you one story. We had the opportunity to present the Ballet Folklórico de la Universidad de Veracruz here in Chicago. And there's a number, as a presenter, if you were to ask me, if there a performance that you remember often, it's going to be the danzón number that they did, because it was done so differently than anything else that I have seen done. The backdrop was beautiful. I mean, you felt like you were in una plaza, right? And the lighting was just gorgeous. It was like nightfall that they recreated, and the dancers, they were dressed in these. It's almost like they were out for a stroll, and they decided to dance as the music came on. And there was something so romantic, sensual, and tasteful at the same time about the way it was done. It's forever engraved into my memory. So, I'm glad that you covered this, because it's I think that I'm glad that I asked you this question, because you're also, like, with your response, you're making me remember this particular number that I saw on stage.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's just very elegant, and like you said, it has something to do with almost like a throwback, like a
Mm-hmm.
like a sort of a flashback to those you know years in the turn of the 20th century, when and today still you can see couples in Veracruz and Mexico City. They get really dressed up,
Yeah.
the men with their hat, and the women with their pañoleta, with their
Yeah.
mantilla, and it's just really beautiful. I mean, I lived in Veracruz, in the city, for about almost a year back in the early 80s, and I remember going. They had danzón twice a week in the Zócalo, and then in a park, and it was just sitting there, just watching couples was just one of my favorite pastimes. It's so beautiful.
So I asked you that, and now I'm going to ask you this: is there an artist that you never got to interview that you wish you had?
Well, I'm still hoping that I will interview. Yeah, there's certainly a few that I wished I could, spend some time with. I would say probably at the top of my list is a Brazilian singer, songwriter, composer, probably one of the most respected songwriters in Brazil, Chico Buarque. Um, Last year, before I interviewed Silvio Rodriguez, I always wanted to, you know, the, yeah, I was always aspiring and hoping that one day I would interview Silvio Rodriguez. Well, I got a chance to interview him sort of long distance. He's obviously in Havana, in Cuba, and me here in Los Angeles. So I recorded my questions, and
Mm-hmm.
luckily he accepted the interview, and he recorded his answers and sent them back. And I did a story about him, which is also in the book. To me, Silvio Rodriguez is right up there. He's one
Yeah.
of the top towers singer songwriters of all time. Next, I would say Chico Buarque from Brazil is
Yeah.
probably somebody that I hope to. I hope I have the time and the opportunity to interview him. But I'm really, ultimately, to me, it's not so much more of wanting to interview this or that artist, because I feel like so much of what is in the book is about down home musicians that are in many cases not well known,
Yeah.
musicians that have worked for years and years, or figures or artists like the story of Guillermo Contreras, who I tell in the story, and it's a story that I did for NPR. He's been collecting instruments like you see here in the back, except he has between 5,000 and 6,000 instruments from all over Latin America, mainly Mexico. And I wanted to tell his story because I felt like, oh my God, he has a treasure, and he himself is a treasure. So I want to tell his story. And
Yeah.
and the same goes with musicians like Rubén Luengas of Pasatono Orquesta, who just, to me, what he did with his instrument, the bajo quinto, which is this instrument right here, he kind of helped to revive this tradition of playing this instrument in the Mixteca region of Oaxaca. So for me, it's more about telling the stories of artists or musicians that should be recognized, like the story of the mariachi, female mariachis. The story of artists that need our attention, that need our recognition, because they are ultimately what makes this cosmic barrio, this world, a better place to live.
So, it's funny because I was going to ask you, you just answered my last question. My last question was, what is the biggest takeaway that you want people to have from this book, this collection of stories? But you just answered that.
Yeah, it's basically that. Yeah.
Yeah. You and I talked, and you asked me if we could publish the interview before a certain date. So I don't know if you want to talk about that, because this interview is going to be shared on Monday, February 1st. But February 3rd is a date that is key, and I don't know if you want to just talk about that.
Well, I just wanted people to know that this book is currently on a promotion. Here it is. It's the publisher in the U.S. Gave me a sort of a special promotion, and the book is available and accessible at a low price right now. And we should mention the book has 150 stories, and it has more than 150 photographs, as you can see in the book. And so once after February 3rd, the book is gonna go. It's going to be more expensive. I'm going to publish a different version of the book without photographs, just the text. So, the stories are still going to be obviously there, and it just won't have any photographs.
Yeah.
So I wanted people to, have the opportunity to get this book before,
price goes up.
Before the price goes up, because after that, you can only get it at the low price without the photographs. So this is an opportunity that I was hoping people, would take advantage of right now.
Well, Betto, I want to say thank you for joining us on behalf of the National Museum of Mexican Art. It's been a pleasure chatting with you about. But okay, one more time, let's get the title of the book. I'm all the way at the bottom of the page of the many questions I asked you. What's the title of your book one more time? Music Stories from the Cosmic Barrio. Look for that book at your local bookstore or online, and make sure you get a copy before the 3rd.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And thank you everybody for having, giving me this opportunity to be here today.
So thanks again for joining us, Betto. How about we leave with one last clip? One of the stories that you covered is an interview that you did with Lila Ronstadt. I don't know if you want to tell us a little bit about that before we leave.
Yeah, over a year ago, a cultural center here, not unlike the Mexican Museum, in Chicago, very important for Mexican culture in Los Angeles, La Plaza de Cultura y Artes, hosted and celebrated the life and work of Lila Ronstadt. And because of that event, I reached out to the producer of the event, colleague, friend Dan Guerrero, and I asked him to put me in touch with the manager, with the publicist, that I was interested in interviewing Lila Ronstadt. And sure enough, I got lucky. I spoke to her at her hotel here in LA. And at the heart of the interview is the important part that Mexican music played in her career. Specifically, the influence of one of the towers of song from Mexico named Lola Beltrán. Lola Beltrán was the single most important influence in Lila Ronstadt's career. She told me that. She says, I always wanted to sing like her. I aspired to sing like her. I wanted to record an album, where I would be, sort of paying a tribute to her. And for many years, the record label, my manager said, no, you can't do that. It's going to ruin your career. Yeah. And finally, she says, I'm going to do it. And she did. And she recorded what became and still is one of the best-selling albums of music ever. Canciones de mi Padre.
So before we leave with the sound clip, I just want to say my jaw dropped a little bit because I'm sitting here listening to you talk, and I'm like, oh my God, I can actually see that. Like I'm listening, I'm hearing Linda Ronstadt's voice, and I'm hearing what you're saying right now, and you could see, if you think about it, you could see how she influenced her. Lola Beltran.
And here's one more tidbit that she told me, which I had no idea. And frankly, I spent hours and hours watching YouTube interviews, reading about her, listening to interviews she's done before. Not one of them mentions this fact. The song called Blue Bayou.
Mm-hmm.
That song specifically, she says, she was trying to, emulate Lola Beltran in that particular song. That song became one of her biggest hits. This is from the mid-1970s. She also recorded a version in Spanish of the same song. The lyrics were translated by her father. Her father called her on the phone from Arizona, from Tucson, and she wrote down the lyrics on a piece of paper or napkin or whatever. And those are the lyrics that she ended up recording in the studio, because they said, let's record this in Spanish. The song, I heard that song in Mexico, in the mid-1970s in Spanish. And she says, the reason why there were places where they wouldn't play it, like in Spain, they didn't want to play it. The record label said, no, that song doesn't sound good. Her Spanish sounds awful. So they wouldn't play it on the radio because of that. But she says, yeah, that's the story. She says, look, I don't speak Spanish. I'm obviously I learned how to sing and all that, but those lyrics were written by, my dad translated the song, and that's how I recorded on a piece of paper from, taking down the lyrics that my father gave me over the phone.
Wow, that's a great story. And I think that's a good way for us to say goodbye. Thanks again for joining us, Betto Arcos. Best of luck on your book. Can't wait to get a copy. I'm going to buy my copy, I promise you. And for all of you joining us, thanks again. We leave you with this clip with Linda Ronstadt and Betto Arcos, the interview he did with her.
I sat down with Linda Ronstadt at her hotel room the day after she was honored at La Plaza de Cultura y Artes, an art center in downtown LA. Throughout her career, Ronstadt has received all kinds of major awards and recognition, but she says the celebration that took place at La Plaza was special.
I don't usually like things like that, but with Mexicans it's fun. It's a different feeling. I feel like I'm at home.
Ronstadt's celebration was indeed close to home. Her uncle, Jose Ronstadt, shared a family story from the stage. In the late 1990s, in the middle of a concert in Tucson, the great Mexican ranchera singer Lola Beltran stopped the show and asked a question.
Is Mr. Ronstadt here? Gilbert Ronstadt, Linda's dad. She asked Gilbert to come up to the front of the stage. She had beautiful zarape un rebozo blanco de seda. She took it away and she says, Mr. Ronstadt, on behalf of every Mexicano, I want you to give this to your daughter Linda. It's because of Linda that the music of mariachi will never die.
She was 8 years old when she first heard Beltran, who made a strong impression on her.
My dad would make a business trip to Mexico every year, and he'd always come back with a bunch of records. He'd bring back Trio Los Panchos, Los Calaveras, Pedro Tariacuri, Amalia Mendoza, Miguel Aceves Mejia, and Lola Beltran primarily. I just fell in love with her music.
In 1987 and again in 1991, Ronstadt released albums that paid homage to that music.
When I wanted to become a professional singer, I wanted to learn those songs. And in those days, you couldn't look up on the internet, and find it. I had my dad, I'd have a scratchy record from my dad, and I couldn't find the lyrics, and I don't speak Spanish, so...
The influence of Mexican music in her pop songs first appear in Roy Orbison's Blue Bayou, a song she recorded in 1977. Ronstadt says she was trying to channel the deep emotion of the Mexican singer she adored.
It just made me think of a Mexican song, especially that big chorus. And I had a hard time finding a resonance in American pop music because the rhythms are based on, the rhythm culture is really black church. The time that we were doing it, the late 60s and the early 70s.
Ronstadt remembers vividly the night of the fabled concert.
I was in a television studio and it was a small audience and it was hotter than hell. It was just too hot to work. That's all I remember, just for sweating and trying to sing.
Ronstadt reminisced about the exciting time when she arrived in Los Angeles from Tucson. The Troubadour Club was at the heart of the music scene in the mid-1960s. She says anybody who played well hung out at the club, and it became like a big, close-knit family.
And Joni Mitchell and Carole King and Elton John and James Taylor, everybody, Neil Young, Crosby, Stills and Nash, they all played the Troubadour. And so you got to hear them over several nights.
I read that recently in an article that you were there when Elton John made his debut at the Troubadour.
I was. He came in and sat in and did a guest set. It was crowded that night, so we were all standing up in the balcony. And I remember he came on stage and it was just like an explosion. But I saw Joni Mitchell there for 2 weeks. She played 2 weeks. I went and saw every single show, 2 shows a night, 3 shows on weekends.
Ronstadt rarely goes out to concerts. She retired in 2011 and was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2012.
But going into a big place is physically impossible for me. I go to the opera when I can get a chance, the opera and the ballet.
I asked Ronstadt if she's seen any young singers recently. When I mentioned La Marisol, lead vocalist of La Santa Cecilia, who performed at La Plaza, Ronstadt was excited to talk about her.
I love her. I've been stalking her on YouTube, and she's so honest. She's got a great voice, and she's dead serious about the music, and it just shows.
There's an upcoming documentary about Ronstadt's career. When I asked her about it, at first she appeared reluctant to comment.
I saw a rough cut. I haven't, I didn't have anything to do with it. It's a weird feeling being examined that closely, It was weird to watch it. It was like watching your whole life flash before your eyes.
The documentary, titled The Sound of My Voice, is due out in September. For The Frame, I'm Betto Arcos.